We are having a bit of a special OVRC meeting today, focusing on the HB6 scandal and dark money and, influence of that on Ohio elections and politics. And so I'm going to share my screen, and then I am, without further ado, going to turn it over to Catherine Tertzer, who is going to introduce our special guest. Catherine, I'll let you go ahead.
Let me add it. So I will tell you, we're going to go through these slides very quickly. But I wanted to ground us before we started hearing from Renee and all the different kind of general areas of the House Bill 6 scandal. And I also thought, let's go back and look at, so the title of House Bill 6 is, it creates Ohio Clean Air Program. And I always think, when we think back to when they were pitching to us in 2019 and those happy families with Generation Now ads, we now know just how incredibly corrupt this was. And House Bill 6 has become, synonymous. It's become, when you say House Bill 6, it means the same thing as corruption. So Mia, if you'll move to the next slide, I think the thing that is important is to think about the fact that dark money was used. I mentioned Generation Now, which is a nonprofit or a 501c3 that was used to lobby the public. But it's important to remember that FirstEnergy money was used to lobby to actually get Larry Householder in as the speaker. So that was dark money in politics. So FirstEnergy money that was covered up and secret through the use of nonprofits. And they ended up getting Householder elected, his buddies in, and set the stage for the bailout of those nuclear plants on Lake Erie. So there's 2 nuclear plants. Mia, if you'll move to the next slide. I always think it's kind of helpful to think about the scandal by the numbers. So we're talking about a $60 million scandal. We're talking about, 60 million can be an investment if you are crooked, if you expect to get $1.5 billion. And I think that's the other thing that I think is so important. The other thing to think about is, that at this point, FirstEnergy has admitted as part of their deferred prosecution agreement that they did, in fact, participate in this orchestration of getting House Bill 6 implemented, and that they have paid a fee essentially for lying about their lobbying activities. Of course, their fee didn't amount to the same that they said that they actually admitted paying Sam Randazzo, the former chair of the Public Utilities Commission. And then Mia, I think it's important to think about, that in fact, in the deferred prosecution agreement, they admitted to conspiring with officials and other individuals in exchange for specific official action. And I think that's really the definition of bribery, that in fact, and here we have an image. One of the things I'm going to ask Renee about is, I don't know how you tell this tale without images. So I really want to hear how she crafted her podcast and how this all came together. I think this FirstEnergy stadium is amazing. The other thing is, as we move forward, Mia, which we have this House Bill 6, once, householders arrested and, it becomes very clear all of the shenanigans that were going on, the nuclear bailout was taken away. Because, of course, House Bill 6 became toxic, but that doesn't mean that all of House Bill 6 was removed. And so we need to remember that we're still bailing out coal plants. These are the Ohio Valley Electric Corporation's coal plants. One's in Ohio, the other is in Indiana. And we continue to do that. Mia, if you'll move to the next slide. I think the thing that's really sad about this is because of the bailout of these aging plants, we're breathing dirtier air, and it's costing us $533,000 per day. That's an estimate from the Ohio Consumer Council. And so it's very important to realize that the rollback of Ohio's renewable energy efficiency standards, that's not been put back. So they took away something that was really important so that we would have cleaner air, and they created something that benefited electricity companies. AEP is the biggest beneficiary. And with that, I would like to introduce Renee Fox. So Renee is a reporter with WOSU. She has been there for a decade. This is 89.7 NPR News. Prior to this, she was in the Air Force. So she is a veteran who served in Afghanistan. She went from not even just coast to coast, but her educational path is interesting. She started in Massachusetts at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, focused on international journalism, and then political science degree at in Hawaii. I love this. It's Pacific University in Honolulu, and here she is in Ohio. And with that, I'm going to start with a really simple question. And Mia, if you will spotlight the two of us. So my question for you, Renee, to begin with is, how is it that you describe, how do you describe the scandal? How is it that you explain it?
Oh, um, I think I think we always start with the fact that it's Ohio's biggest corruption scandal to date. It's had the most arrests, the most money involved, that type of thing. And I think that um, more than that, though, I think it's one of the biggest utility scandals in the country. So, yeah, that's typically how I would start with describing it. Um,
One of the things that I have wondered about, and I mentioned it as we were going through the slides, how do you how did you put together a podcast? Because there's some amazing visuals. There's like that Mount Rushmore image, the FirstEnergy Stadium on the Ohio State House, the Randazzler, Sam Randazzo in his outfit. Like there are some really amazing images, and I wondered, what were the challenges in conveying all of this detailed information without the benefit of people seeing it?
yeah, well, we went back and forth on adding a digital element to this um to as like a image like to go along with it, and we couldn't we didn't have enough people to do it because what I wanted to do was upload all of the court documents, and these are hundreds of pages for each day of trial and things like that. So what we settled on was trying to describe some of the images during the podcast, especially the Mount Rushmore one where they removed the president's heads and put the heads of the CEO, Chuck Dowling, or Chuck Jones, Mike Dowling, and Randazzo on there instead of the presidents. But the reason we settled on a podcast for this project was because when the federal trial wrapped up and they made all of the records accessible to the public once the trial was finished, and we scrambled to get a hold of the records, and they were like, "Oh, Renee, can you put together a quick turnaround story? There's this audio, you can listen to it and come up with a 45-second spot that we would air that you might hear on 89.7 just on your daily commute." And I get the records in the mail on a thumb drive, and there's just hundreds and thousands of
Yes.
kilobytes of information. And I said, so they said, "Can you do that?" And I said, "No, no, I cannot make an accurate report without really listening to this." So what we decided was, well, this is our medium. We're radio, we're NPR. Um, people, we can do this kind of journalism. People, our audience will appreciate it, and we can take advantage of the fact that the a lot of the evidence was audio based. So we had an audio rich environment to work with, and that's kind of what inspired the podcast. Well, and then it kind of got away from me because I do like to do investigative work too. So I used the audio for the first couple of episodes, and then the latter couple of episodes, I really just break down the circumstances of the environment, the political landscape, 501c4s, and how they proliferate and allow these types of scandals to grow.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with some questions that we're hoping you can answer. So, how did Householder grab the attention of the FBI?
Oh, well, you might think that with $61 million trading hands back and forth, that through different profits going to politicians who are supposed to report their campaign spending and donations, that it would have come around with regular reporting, something like that. But no, it was a total accident, really, that the federal investigators found out about this because they had undercover agents who were looking into Cincinnati city council people who were thought to be doing corrupt activity at that time, and some people were tried and convicted as a result of that investigation. But during that investigation, they ran into someone named Neil Clark, and he was a big time lobbyist in Ohio. And he was involved in lots of different industries in lobbying for them. And so once they started pulling that thread, and Neil Clark was a bit of a braggart at times, so he liked to tell people about his big clients and how much money was changing hands, and that's when the investigators were on to it and started putting their resources toward a House Bill 6 investment.
So, one of the things that, we often talk about Householder, but, we're the Ohio Voting Rights Coalition, like one of the things that, I was just appalled by had to do with what happened during the referendum. Could you tell us a little bit about what happened during the referendum, meaning when folks tried to collect signatures to stop House Bill 6 going into place? And then a little bit more kind of about Matt Borges and his role.
Right. So yeah, Larry was able to get the coalition together to pass House Bill 6. He had to get some naysayers on board by giving AEP some stuff, and that's how we got the OVEC subsidies for the coal plants. But after the bill is passed, there's a lot of people in Ohio that don't like this bill. It's got a misleading name. It gets rid of all sorts of things that people have fought for, minimum standards for what we need to worry about when it comes to climate change. And so an effort was organized to repeal it. Now, there was some attempts behind the scenes to try to prevent the referendum from even being approved, but those efforts didn't work. So once the referendum was in full swing, we saw Householder's team funneling millions and millions of dollars to the effort to stop the referendum. So that's when we were getting the airwaves just flooded with ads about how we shouldn't be signing the petition to overturn the bill because we're going to let China come in and start running our electricity if we do that. Just lots of very
Xenophobic.
Yeah, it was very xenophobic, and it was propaganda more than I think it was political ads. I think it might have crossed that line, but not only were there ads, there was also an effort to stop the actual signature collectors from doing their jobs, and they did this in a multitude of ways, from tracking and harassing them, putting trackers on their cars to follow them with private detectives to kind of intimidate them into not collecting signatures, to plot out where they would be so that they knew where they could set up counter signature collectors, even though they were collecting signatures for an effort that had no like legal basis. They just were collecting signatures to say, look, some people don't want to repeal the bill. And they spent millions of dollars buying out signature collection firms to pay them to do nothing, so that the people who wanted to overturn House Bill 6 couldn't find enough people to overturn the bill. And that effort did fail.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mia Lewis, kicked this meeting off, is somebody who was doing voter registration and had one of the blockers essentially yell and, basically send people, potential voters, away. And I noticed that Bill Davis said he experienced a signature blockers, and it's, it was just
There was even a
incredibly,
crime committed against.
yes,
There was
yeah,
an
just
assault.
incredibly awful. I'm I'm also really interested in thinking about kind of the role of whistleblowers. So yeah, I mean, sometimes we
That's
spend
where
so
we've
much time
been.
thinking about the villains. We're not thinking about, well, what about the whistleblowers and what happened? Why did why were they become whistleblowers? But also I'm interested in like, what were the consequences for them?
Right. Well, that's a good way to bring in Matt Borges, because is one of the lobbyists that worked on this referendum effort, and kind of organized all of these blockers and private detective agencies and whatnot. Now, it was almost serendipitous that Borges happened to know and had mentored a man named Tyler Furman, who grew up in Republican circles, volunteering his time to Republican Party efforts, and genuinely like felt he belonged in that party. And Borges had mentored him and kind of hired him for some campaigns and given him a chance. And so he had a great love for Matt Borges. But as Tyler got older, he looked for work that he like started to believe in a little more, and he cared for the environment, and really didn't like House Bill 6. And unbeknownst to him, like he had no idea Borges was working on that for FirstEnergy, and but knew that it would put him at odds with Matt Borges. So he went to him and asked him, I'm thinking about taking this campaign to repeal House Bill 6. Like, what do you think of that? And Matt encouraged him to do it and said, go spread your wings, do something you believe in. Well, a couple weeks later, Tyler gets a call from Matt, and Matt has asked him to meet and has asked him if he will kind of throw the referendum effort under the bus. Not kind of throw, definitely throw the referendum effort under the bus in exchange for money to pay off some of Tyler's debts. Because they were friends, Matt had known that Tyler had a couple, financial issues. Not major ones, but, enough that it would make his life easier. And because they were friends, he kind of thought it was a shoo-in. Well, Tyler was pretty offended and shocked and didn't really know what to say in the moment, kind of put it off and was going to turn him down, but then got to talking to a friend who was in law enforcement, and encouraged him to call the FBI too. And when they did, they didn't know this at the time, but they had already started this House Bill 6 investigation. And so they were like, oh, this sounds like it might be connected to our House Bill 6 investigation. Will you tell him yes and go undercover? And so that's how Tyler became a whistleblower that uncovered more of the conspiracy, and led to the conviction of Matt Borges, for sure, and probably householder.
Well, I think for so
in
many,
exchange,
the fact that that Matt Borges essentially threatened threatened Tyler
Yes.
Furman.
Well, as he's giving him the terms of the bribe that he's willing to pay, he's also telling him, and obviously, you know, if anything goes bad with this, I don't want to have to blow up your house. Threatened violence against him, and and then like when everything did come out, Tyler did feel kind of exiled in Columbus in Ohio politics and decided to move, and part of his personal journey was leaving the Republican Party behind. And I believe he's either last I checked he was getting involved in politics where he's at now in another state that
Minnesota.
Minnesota. I knew it was either Minnesota or Wisconsin. Didn't want to say the wrong one.
So this is a tidbit for folks that I thought was completely interesting, that when Tyler Furman did this, it wasn't like, I don't know, the mob shows that we watch where, the microphone is taped to his chest and he's off to have these conversations. They put it in his baseball cap. So this is a guy who's, shall we say, his hair is quickly leaving. And so the recorder was literally in a baseball cap.
That he wore frequently.
Yes.
And the other one was in a key fob, which is pretty nonchalant.
Yes, absolutely. So, one of the things that folks are at this point are wondering about, okay, so what about the state charges?
Right.
So there are some additional state charges, and so some of us were surprised. Can you tell us a little bit about the state charges and like what does it mean? Like when we think about Sam Randazzo is somebody who died as a result of suicide, and does that impact the case?
Right. I think there's still a lot of open questions on that front, just because nothing has been solidified. I'd phrase it like that. But so what happened was Yost charged Randazzo, the state charged Randazzo, Jones, and Dowling all with basically participating in a pattern of corrupt activity, which is the state version of what Larry Householder was accused of too. And now Randazzo had some extra charges though. So when they started investigating Randazzo, they came across some other things he had done where they alleged that he stole money from clients, and also made decisions counter to his clients' needs and whatnot. But he did die before those charges could unfurl. Now, Yost has said that he doesn't see this deterring the case. But one of the things that's a little more unclear is how the state might recoup some of the charges or some of the money from Randazzo, because they wanted to confiscate the bribe money that FirstEnergy said they gave him, which is about $4 million. So that money, it's hard to say if it can be forfeited without going through a trial, and how do you go through a trial when he's passed away? So I think we're still waiting to hear the final answer on that one.
So I was really interested because I think, I spent a lot of time thinking about money in politics. I was really interested in the charges that were about violating Ohio campaign finance law, specifically using, Larry Householder using his campaign war chest to hire lawyers to defend him. What did you make of that?
It's like it's one of those things that it's like on the Sunday you've got all of these other toppings going on, and that's the cherry on top, because that's because none of this would have been able to happen if Householder hadn't lied on his campaign finance reports. So it goes to show though that there was really inadequate ways of finding out about those lies, because it took an entire 4-year-long investigation to actually lead to those charges. And it makes you wonder just how many other cases are there like that just won't ever be uncovered.
Well, Mia had an interesting question, which was like, how many election cycles and elections did this specific scandal impact?
Oh, um, that's a good question because it goes back to 2018, I think, when Householder first wanted to bring in some new blood that would agree with him on more things and be indebted to him. So it definitely starts in at least in 2018. And so you get the primary and the general, and then 2019 was heavily influenced too, primary and a general, and then 2020, and then the ramifications just um, just went after that because Householder eventually left, and then there was new elections, and yeah, so it expanded quite a few election cycles for sure.
Well, and I've been very interested in kind of the revelations that have to do with kind of the dark money that, for example, went to the lieutenant governor who was thinking about becoming governor. So that was $1 million from FirstEnergy to support him. And then, 2.5 million to different nonprofits or 501c4s to support Governor DeWine. And we know that the power of incumbency often propels people to the next election. And then there was that recent revelation of, public records of, I don't remember exactly how much money it was, that 400,000 that went to Matt Huffman's PAC. At least that's the way it was labeled. Oh, Mia's highlighting it's 300,000, but to Matt Huffman's PAC, who at the moment is eyeing being the Speaker of the House. So one of the things that is a challenge is we're talking about things that happened 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years. When you think about, we don't have the transparency we needed. Were there folks that you interviewed about kind of transparency and reforms that you thought were thoughtful, or that you just want to share with us so that we can think about how we could improve the system? Because we are talking about a snowball that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah,
And we're still paying the cost of corruption,
yeah, I feel like I could
550,000 a
quote
day.
you. I could quote you right now and stick it in there. But yeah, I think there's a couple of bills that are going through the state house, right, or sitting in the state house might be a better way to put it, right now that you all might find of interest, that would do a couple things. One of the big ones would finish the job of reversing House Bill 6, of getting rid of the subsidies for the coal plants on the Ohio River in Indiana and Ohio. There's another bill that Representative McNally from Youngstown has, that I wrote about last week, that I found really interesting, and that would require a lot more reporting from these companies about their lobbying. They would have to make a yearly report to the PUCO outlining all of the money that they spent on lobbying. Now, that bill did get a hearing in the Government Oversight Committee, which Rep. McNally found optimistic and promising. But one of the big naysayers for the bill was Rep. Bill Seitz, who helped pass House Bill 6, and he called the bill silly. He kind of made it seem like it didn't have a snowball's chance in hell, kind of, I would say. But Rep. McNally is still feeling optimistic about the bill, and she questions him as well, what do you want to do to make sure House Bill 6 doesn't happen again? So, and that's kind of an open question still.
Well, I was really interested in kind of all of the dark money that was used during the House primary. And certainly this is something that Bill Seitz, I was in the Cincinnati Enquirer, was identified, yes, wants to keep 501c4s more, their funding secret. And yet he identified the problems with, the collaboration with candidates and clearly seeing his friends being attacked, these incumbents being attacked with dark money. I have always thought, well, if it's in their self-interest to create greater transparency, there might be more interest in actually advancing things. But it is interesting, when you think about, I came of age at a time period where there was this sense we have the right to know, we need transparency following Watergate. Oh my gosh, we need to be able to follow the money. We need greater transparency in elections and at what's happening at the State House and in Congress. And there were really not advocates until the past few years for keeping things dark.
Right, and it's kind of, people can just kind of say it now because there's enough, they know that it's, that they all agree and that it's not, even, I think, I'm sure there's plenty of people on both sides of the aisle that don't want more of the exposure.
Well, when you were saying, you're describing them essentially as stuck at the State House and not getting hearings, when we think about, Citizens United decision, that was in 2010.
Right.
We're, 14 years out and we're living with the very real consequences of not having transparency. So let's see. So we had some other questions. So one of the questions, which is a really simple one, just has to, it has to do, everything has taken a really long time. The only people who have been found guilty are Householder and Borges, and they are serving time. Are there other folks who pled guilty? What else has happened?
Yeah, so in order to secure the Householder and Borges convictions, the government got Juan Cespedes and Jeff Longstreth, who were who were also lobbyists, to testify about certain aspects of the conspiracy. So they've admitted guilt, but they haven't been sentenced, if I recall. I believe it's
That's
gonna.
correct, as far as I know. Although Jeff Longstreth, I think his part of the trial was super interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Um, if my memory serves me right, I believe he's the one that describes the scenario where the check is passed across the table during like one of the initial bribes, where they're all sitting around talking and the check gets slid across and it's for $400,000 and Householder kind of nods and they acknowledge what a big check it was. So
And that the issue is extremely important. I think it's one of those where, it can be complicated to think about bribery when it comes to, a support of a political career, the support of basically the support of power versus, here's a check or, that you're gonna just deposit or, a car or, things to pay. You talked about Tyler Furman. Can you tell me a little bit about like what were the personal benefits versus the benefit of additional power for Larry Householder?
yeah, yeah, I think in addition, because Householder used the money not only for like to arrange his political environment, basically, because that's what he did. He kind of went in and clear cut the forest and planted a new one that he liked, and but he also benefited in other ways. He got money and I'm sorry, I'm a little rusty on those details right now, so I don't want to say anything wrong. But they definitely had money that they spent on personal things. But I think that the biggest thing for Larry was just building that empire of being able to bring in new people to the State House, some of them who are still there, who would be indebted to him, and that was invaluable because FirstEnergy had been trying to get subsidies from ratepayers for years before Larry came around and helped them do it, because there was a lot of Republicans that weren't on board with that for whatever reason. Didn't I'm sure it wasn't complete altruism or anything, but it has a lot to do with who had alliances with which companies and donors and lobbyists and that kind of thing.
So one of the things I was really interested in was the money that was from FirstEnergy that Larry Householder was trying to coordinate specifically to extend term limits. And you remember Ohioans passed term limits in 1992. We do know people bought back and forth between the chambers, which
Yeah,
it
that
can
was
extend things, but
yes.
can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was the next thing on the to-do list, basically. This was what they were going to do after defeating the HB6 referendum. They hadn't started to be pulled in for questioning. These were some of the last recordings that we got of them talking about their next moves. I think it was in about June or July, shortly before it was all came out. And the thing they were gonna do was kind of ingenious, was to bring in, they were going to make the term limits more strict, but they were going to grandfather Larry in so that he could basically be Speaker of the House for 16 more years, was I think the calculus. But meanwhile, they would get favor from the people by saying, okay, you can no longer hop back and forth between the chambers. You get 8 years in one or the other, or something like that was what they were going to do. And they had already started soliciting donations for that effort when the scandal broke. So that was next on up to bat.
So one of the things that like Bond villains tend to be very chatty. One of the things I thought that was interesting in this scandal had to do with Neil Clark, and he's so one of the things that's super sad, and I did throw the hotline into the chat, so you have that. It's 988 Suicide Prevention Hotline. Another character in this guy, Neil Clark, is somebody who left us as a result of suicide. But he was, shall we say, loquacious. And can you tell us a little bit about the recordings and like how that actually played into the trial?
Yeah. Neil Clark kind of talked themselves into, they kind of revealed a lot of this conspiracy just by bragging to guys he thought he was getting business from. But yeah, Neil is a complicated character who really drew me in. When we first heard about all of the tapes becoming public record, we kept calling them the Householder tapes in the newsroom, because Householder is the guy. He's the Speaker of the House. He's at the top of the food chain there. But after you start listening to them, you might call them the Clark tapes, because they're mostly Clark. The Householder, you'll hear most of Householder's bits in the podcast because he wasn't in every recording. They got him on tape when he called Neil to talk. Sometimes we're not sure about all of those calls, because they only provided us with the ones that were admitted into the trial, not all of the recordings there. So there's probably a lot more. And so we get Householder on tape when he's talking to Larry on the phone or during a couple of these business dinners that they had. But mostly it's Neil Clark. He's been set up by these FBI guys pretending to have their own development company. And they're whining and dining and trying to get, at the same time as all this was happening, this Ohio sports betting bills were being developed. And these guys were pretending to be a company that wanted to build some boutique hotels and wanted some laws that were favorable to the hotel business to set up like maybe a book in hotels. And there was a lot of different interests going on into that bill. So Neil was representing them and going back and forth, and but that most of the business is done in 5 or 10 minutes, and the rest of it they're telling stories about all sorts of things from how they grew up to women cheating on women, how they raised their children to the politics and the really interesting stuff, the stories about what it was like in the state house and other illegal activity that they took part in. Yeah, Neil Clark liked to tell a story, and he had a lot of stories to tell. And so, because the FBI targeted him, we got to hear a lot of those stories about the state house, about digging through dumpsters to find dirt on people and things like that.
Well,
And even his grandma's spaghetti sauce recipe.
well, there we go. So I think we've covered a bunch of different things, but we didn't cover everything. So do you have recommendations for how people can get to the podcast? I just get it on the NPR app. Are there other places it's located?
Yeah, pretty much any streaming app that you use, you'll find it. And if you don't have a streaming app or don't want to bother with that, you can just go into Google, type in WOSU, the Power Grab, and it'll bring you to our landing page. And you can listen to, oh, yeah, there's the link to the NPR one. And it's the same version, and there'll be this original 6 episodes that we put out, plus a short 15-minute update that we put out after Sam Randazzo died.
And I was gonna say, you can listen to Neil Clark, Larry's hired gun. Also, I would highlight that Melissa suggested reading Neil Clark's book,
Yes.
which is fabulous, if that makes sense. And some of it you're like, okay, sure, Neil. And so I would encourage you as you're reading that to think a little bit about it. I think
Yeah, I
one of
think
the
it
things
was
that
$30 on Amazon when I
yeah.
bought it.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, it is incredibly sad that there were 2 suicides. I also think, what was Neil Clark dying when he was found dead? What was he wearing?
Oh, he was wearing the DeWine for governor shirt.
And was it the Ides of March? Am I remembering that
It
correctly?
was the Ides of March. Yeah, and we reference what he wrote about that in the podcast, but he gets into it a little more deeply in his book about he took a real philosophical look at life, I think. Or he saw himself as a tragic hero who I think he knew he had 2 sides to himself, and he knew when he did things that weren't right. But
And then Sam Randazzo's suicide was right before, it was right before the state of the state.
oh, I didn't really make that connection.
Yeah, it was right before the
Yeah,
state of the state.
it was
All
also
right.
yeah.
We could keep going and talking, which I'm sorry to take you down another path. And I know lots of you have questions, and check out the podcast. And we're just, Renee, I just wanted to say a great big thank you. Money influences elections, and secret money in elections is really corrosive, and it was good to think about what happened and to help us think about, well, what are the kinds of things that we need to support. In the future, folks, we'll spend some time thinking about kind of reform efforts and what has worked in other states. And I just wanted to say thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you asking me to come, and I appreciate you always being there for us when we need a source to talk about these things, because you're so articulate.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
on that, thank you much. I'm handing it back to Mia.
Yes, thank you so much. And I just want to call everyone's attention to the link that Kelly dropped in the chat there, which is to ask legislative leaders to fully repeal HB6. It's about time. We don't want that hanging over us. So thank you so much. I'm going to unspotlight you guys, and I'm going to go back to our slides. I lost Catherine there. Hold on one second. There we go. I'm going to stop recording. I have all sorts of housekeeping things to do. There we go.